Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty unique. We're going to be looking at, well, the philosophy of bread. Yeah, bread. You guys sent in some really interesting sources. So we're going to go through them together. We're going to see what bread can teach us about history and culture. Maybe even about, like, ourselves, you know?
It really is fascinating when you think about it. I mean, bread has been such a fundamental part of human life for, well, like forever.
Right, like our sources take us all the way back to, like, 10,000 BC. That's the start of agriculture.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, imagine those early farmers. I mean, they figured out how to grow grain, how to bake bread. It's kind of a big deal when you think
Well,
about
it
it.
totally changed everything. And you know what's really cool?
Right.
Sourdough. You
Yeah.
have records showing that sourdough was discovered totally by accident in Egypt around like 6,000 BC.
Wow.
And this mother dough, you know, it's a living culture passed down through generations. It's like this really beautiful connection to the past, don't you think?
It's almost like those ancient bakers were, like, accidentally starting, I don't know, like the whole philosophy of bread, you know?
Exactly. And speaking of foundations, you know how we always talk about empires rising and falling?
Yeah.
And we credit their success to like military strength or, you know, some kind of technological advancement. Well, it turns out that wheat, the very thing you need to make bread, it played a bigger role than you might think.
Really? So, like, wheat was a form of power.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you needed it to feed your people, your armies. You needed it to trade.
So bread was, like, strategic. Wow, I never thought of it like that.
Just think about it. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, their empires were built on bread. Literally.
So you're saying that wheat, like the availability of wheat, could actually make or break a civilization.
It really could.
Wow, that's pretty intense. So we've got bread as this, like, essential foundation for, you know, for societies. But the sources also talk about bread as, like, a powerful symbol, right? What's that all about?
Well, think about the language we use, like breadwinner. You
Yeah.
know, or putting bread on the table. We don't just use bread literally, do we? It represents something more. It's about sustenance, it's about livelihood, it's even about like family.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah, and what about, like, those cultural traditions around bread? There's so many.
Oh, tons. Like in Eastern Europe, for example, they offer bread and salt as a gesture of welcome.
Right.
It's just this beautiful symbol of hospitality. And then, you know, in India, there's this saying, roti apra or makan, bread, clothes, and house. They use it to describe like basic human needs.
It's like the essentials.
Right?
Exactly.
I love that saying.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah.
It really shows how bread is so much more than just food.
Yeah.
Like, it's about survival. It's about having a home,
You're feeling
secure. And this whole idea of bread as a symbol, it even extends into, you know, religion.
Right. Yeah. Like bread plays a huge role in so many different faiths. I'm thinking of the Jewish challah, the Christian communion, you know?
It's like bread becomes like a sacred object that connects people to something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. The challah, for instance, with that beautiful braided form, it symbolizes the interconnectedness of life. And then in Christian communion, you have bread representing the body of Christ. And that signifies sacrifice and spiritual nourishment.
Wow. It's amazing how a simple loaf of bread can carry so much meaning, isn't it?
It really is.
Both, you know, literally and figuratively. But the way we make bread has changed a lot over time. You know, we've gone from those ancient methods like grinding grain with stones and nurturing sourdough to, like, mass production, right?
That's right.
So I'm curious, how has that shift impacted the philosophy of bread?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, think about it. We've gone from these like really time-consuming ancient methods of making bread to this age of like industrial bread production.
Yeah, like those old methods sound really time-consuming.
Yeah.
Compared to, like, you know, popping a pre-sliced loaf in the toaster.
For sure. But has that shift, you know, the shift in how we make bread, has it affected its value? I mean, sliced bread, it's convenient, right? It emerged in 1928. And then by 1961, we have the Chorleywood bread process. That really revolutionized mass production.
Yeah.
But did these changes, did they sacrifice some of the soul, the philosophy that was baked into those handcrafted loaves?
It makes you wonder, right? Like, is that why we're seeing this this resurgence of artisan bread making today. Are people trying to get back to that tradition, like reconnect with that deeper meaning of bread?
I think that's definitely part of it. This revival, it really embraces those time-honored techniques, that slower fermentation, the use of, high-quality ingredients. It's not just about baking. It's about rediscovering the craft, the philosophy behind it.
And speaking of rediscovering, our research actually mentioned a pretty funny historical tidbit.
Oh, yeah.
In the 18th century Czech Republic, bakers who like overstated the weight of their loaves,
Yeah.
they were punished by being dunked in a lake.
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah.
That's serious.
That shows you how seriously they took bread back then.
Yeah.
It was about trust, fairness, community.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've talked about how bread represents sustenance, community, spirituality, but, it's also had a bit of a darker side, hasn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like, it's been used as a tool of control and even manipulation throughout history.
That's right.
I'm thinking of that Roman practice of bread and circuses, keep the masses distracted with cheap food and entertainment.
Exactly. And let's not forget about grain taxation. I mean, it goes back centuries. It shows how those in power could literally control the supply of bread and, in a way, control the people.
Right. So it's like bread, the symbol of life, being used as a means of oppression.
It's a scary thought.
It is. And that makes me think about the Irish potato famine, Potatoes were the staple food there.
Yeah.
But the government, they were focused on wheat-based taxation. And it actually made the crisis even worse.
It's a tragic example of what happens when you don't have diverse food systems, and how political decisions about staple foods can have devastating consequences. It really underscores how important it is for communities to have control over their food sources.
It's a sobering reminder that food, especially something as essential as bread, can be a really powerful tool, for good or for bad.
Absolutely.
And it makes me think, it brings up this important question about the philosophy of bread today.
Yeah.
Like, in our modern world, where do we draw the line between nourishment and exploitation?
It's a tough question.
It is.
Yeah.
Between, convenience and quality.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah. But before we dive too deep into that, I want to take a closer look at, the incredible diversity of bread itself. Like, we got everything from, the simple white loaf to the crusty baguette, the chewy bagel, you name it.
Right. The variety is just amazing. And each type of bread, it has its own unique story, its own cultural significance, its own place within the philosophy of bread.
Yeah. Like our research mentioned Hovis bread in the UK, for example.
Oh, yeah. Hovis.
It survived wartime rationing.
Ah.
And it became this symbol of, resilience and community spirit.
That's a great example. And then you have the bagel.
Oh, the bagel.
Originating in Jewish communities in Poland. And now, people eat bagels all over the world.
I know, right? They're everywhere.
It even had a starring role in that 2022 film. What was it called? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Really?
Talk about an unexpected twist on the philosophy of bread.
That's amazing. I love it. It's like, who knew a bagel could be so philosophical, right?
Right. And it's not just those specialty breads either.
Yeah.
Think about the humble bun.
The bun. Oh.
From burger buns to bao buns, each one tells a story about, culture and culinary creativity. And what about flatbreads like pita and naan?
Well, flatbread.
They've been around for centuries, connecting us to those ancient traditions.
It's incredible. It's like we've taken these simple ingredients, flour, water, yeast, and we've transformed them into this incredible array of breads.
I know.
Each with its own place in our culinary history and philosophy.
It makes you wonder, though, what will the future of bread hold? Will technology change it even further? Will we rediscover even more ancient techniques?
It's exciting to think about the possibilities, isn't it? But one thing's for sure, bread. Bread will always be a reflection of ourselves, our values, our relationship with the world.
Well said.
This has been a really fascinating start to our deep dive into the philosophy of bread. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have.
From ancient origins to modern dilemmas. But there's still so much more to explore.
Before we move on, I think it's important to remember that this diversity of bread, it's not just about different shapes and flavors. It really reflects how different cultures around the world have, interpreted bread, like how they've incorporated it into their lives, their beliefs.
You're right, yeah, and we talked about the challah earlier, but there's so many other examples. Like, our research mentioned how a long, intricately braided challah, like it symbolized wealth and status in some Jewish communities. And then the round challah for Rosh Hashanah, the one that's filled with raisins and dried fruit, it represents a year of abundance and like upward mobility.
It's incredible how like food, especially something as basic as bread, can like embody such profound aspirations, you know?
Yeah.
Like cultural values.
I know, and the fact that like the Americanized version of challah is often like richer with more sugar and eggs, you know?
Yeah.
It shows how traditions like adapt and evolve as they travel across cultures. It's like a culinary fusion, you know,
Yep.
blending the old with the new.
Exactly. And speaking of cultural adaptations, have you ever thought about the baguette and its connection to the French Revolution?
Wait, what? The baguette has a revolutionary past. I had no idea.
It's a really interesting story. So in 18th century France, bread, specifically wheat, it was at the heart of all this social unrest, the quality of bread, the price of bread. It became a major point of contention. You know, like it was fueling the flames of revolution.
So the baguette emerged from this fight for equality.
In a way, yes. So lawmakers trying to like quell the unrest, they passed this legislation. It was called the Bread of Equality.
Wow.
And it aimed to regulate wheat prices, make sure everyone in France had access to bread. This, along with the restrictions on bakers' working hours, it kind of led to this need for a bread that could be baked quickly, but was still appealing to customers.
Okay.
And voila, the baguette was born.
I never would have guessed that a simple loaf of bread could have such a like dramatic origin story.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it became this symbol of so much like social justice, cultural identity, even a nation's history.
It really shows you how food and culture and politics are all intertwined, doesn't it?
It does.
And it brings us back to that question we touched on earlier, like, does bread still hold the same power and significance in today's world? You know?
Yeah.
In a world that's so dominated by technology and innovation.
It's a great question. I mean, on the one hand, we've got this amazing revival of artisan bread making, right?
Yeah.
Which is a clear sign that people are like yearning for tradition, you know?
Yeah.
For those time-honored techniques, authentic flavors.
Absolutely. But then, on the other hand, we can't deny that mass-produced bread is still, like, everywhere. And it's often filled with all these additives, and it lacks the nutritional value of, you know, those traditional breads.
It's like we're stuck in this paradox.
Yeah.
You know, like this tension between tradition and modernity.
Right.
Between like convenience and quality. And bread is right in the middle of it all.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, you know, where does that leave the philosophy of bread today? It seems like its future, much like its past, is really linked to the choices we make, you know, as individuals and as a society.
So if you're saying, like, do we prioritize affordability over nutrition? Do we embrace those slower traditional techniques? Or do we go for the convenience of mass production?
Exactly.
It's like each choice reflects a different aspect of our relationship with bread and what it represents.
Exactly. But regardless of those choices, you
Yeah.
know, one thing's for sure, bread in all its forms, it will always play a vital role in our lives. It'll reflect our values, our cultures, our evolving relationship with food.
That's a really good point. You know, this deep dive into bread has been a real eye-opener for me. I've learned so much about its history, its symbolism, its impact on society.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? I mean, from ancient origins to modern dilemmas, bread has really revealed itself to be so much more than just food. It's a symbol of civilization, of culture, of power, and even of the human spirit itself.
It's a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. You know, like we've taken these basic ingredients and we've transformed them into this incredible array of culinary creations.
I know.
Each with its own unique story to tell.
And as we move forward, it's up to each of us to decide, you know,
Yeah.
what role bread will play in our lives. Like, will we honor its rich history and traditions? Will we demand quality and nutrition? Or will we just succumb to the allure of convenience and affordability?
It's a choice we all face every time we reach for a loaf of bread.
That's true.
And on that note, I think it's time to shift gears a little bit. Let's explore the science behind bread making. All right, so we've talked about bread as this like symbol, this cultural thing, even a political tool. But now I kind of want to get my hands dirty.
I know.
The sources mentioned, like the actual science of baking,
Yeah.
you know. Gluten, yeast, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That sounds a little complicated.
It can seem that way, but it's all connected, you know? It all ties back to the philosophy of bread we've been talking about.
Okay, well, break it down for me. Let's start with gluten. So gluten's a protein, right?
Yes.
But what does it actually do in bread?
Well, gluten is what gives bread its structure, you know, like that chewiness, that satisfying texture. And it's formed when two proteins in wheat flour, glutenin and gliadin, they combine with water and you knead it. And it creates this network, almost like a web, of these long elastic strands.
Okay, so gluten's like the backbone of bread.
You could say that, and as you knead the dough, this gluten network, it gets stronger, more elastic. That's why kneading is so important. You're literally building those gluten muscles.
Ah, so that's why my arms get tired after kneading. But what about yeast?
Yeast.
How does that fit into all of this?
Well, yeast is like the little magician that makes bread rise. You know, it feeds on the sugars in the flour, and it produces carbon dioxide gas. And this gas gets trapped in that gluten web we talked about, and it causes the dough to puff up, expand.
So those air pockets in bread, those are like little tiny yeast-powered balloons.
That's a great way to think about it. And the longer you let the yeast do its thing, you know, the more complex the flavors become. That's why sourdough has that distinct tang. It's had time to develop its character.
That's so cool. Speaking of character, what about that delicious brown crust on bread? There's got to be some science behind that too, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's the Maillard reaction. It's a bit complicated, but basically when you heat the dough, the amino acids and sugars, they react, and it creates like hundreds of different flavor compounds.
Wow. So it's like a chemical symphony happening in the oven, turning those basic ingredients into like pure deliciousness.
You got it. And the intensity of that reaction, it depends on the temperature and the time. That's why different breads have different crust colors, different flavor profiles.
Wow, the science of baking is really, really fascinating. But we have to talk about the elephant in the room here, right?
What's that?
Gluten sensitivities.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people can't eat gluten.
Yeah, it's true. Gluten's essential for traditional bread making, but it can cause problems for people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity.
And those conditions are becoming more common, aren't they?
They are, and that's why there's been so much research into developing gluten-free breads, you know, using different flours like rice flour, almond flour, tapioca flour to create breads that everyone can enjoy.
That's amazing. It's like we're using science to like adapt these traditional recipes and make bread accessible to everyone. It's like we're expanding the philosophy of bread, you know, to be more inclusive.
I love that. And it brings us back to the heart of this whole deep dive, really. We've seen how bread connects us to history, to culture, to science. It's more than just food, isn't it? It's a reflection of who we are, how we relate to the world around us.
This whole journey has been incredible. I've learned so much about the philosophy of bread, like from its humble origins to the complex science behind it.
And what about you, listener? What resonated with you the most? Was it the ancient history of bread, the symbolic meanings, the science, or maybe it was the cultural variations?
Maybe you've discovered a newfound appreciation for your local baker.
Yeah.
You know, like the craftsmanship that goes into making bread. Or maybe you're inspired to try baking your own bread from scratch.
Whatever it is, we hope this deep dive has given you something to think about, and maybe a deeper understanding of the role bread plays in our lives.
So the next time you break bread with friends and family, or even just enjoy a simple sandwich, you know?
Yeah.
Remember the incredible journey that loaf has taken.
Yeah.
From grain to table.
Until next time, happy baking, everyone.